This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, welcome to episode 109 of A Geek Leader podcast. And if you would, do me a favor, head on over to Apple Podcasts. You can just go and search for Geek Leader in Google or through your podcast player or wherever, even if you don't use an iPhone or Apple products. But you do listen to the show, obviously, because you wouldn't be hearing me say this otherwise. So go to Apple Podcasts, leave a rating and review. Trying to build those up, and I'm going to start reading those on the show in a couple of weeks. So if you want your review read on the show, go ahead and leave one. That's probably one of the best ways to do that. But that helps spread the word of A Geek Leader podcast. It helps to build leaders that are out there. It helps us to grow in the rankings and get more downloads and more listeners and all that good stuff. So head on over, do that for me. I'd greatly appreciate it. And today on the show, we're going to be talking more about digital transformation and how a company can move into that digital age a little bit better and how the business should react to that. We've got a Wall Street Journal bestselling author, Michael Gale, who wrote the Digital Helix, which was the #1 bestselling book on digital transformation in 2018. He's going to be on the show, and we're going to be talking about digital transformation. We're going to be talking about all the different areas in which a business needs to go through, some of the things that help the process and help move it along. He also hosts a podcast about futuristic stuff, which is pretty awesome. I'm going to link to that in the show notes as well. So I think that's an awesome show. He works for Forbes and does this stuff. So with all that being said, give it up for Michael Gale. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show, we've got Michael Gale. We're going to talk about digital transformation and lots of other really cool topics when it comes to moving a business forward through the digital age. Michael, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. This is going to be a fun conversation too, so let's head at it.
Yeah, so if you don't mind telling the audience kind of a little bit about your past, how you got to where you're at now, and where this book, the Digital Helix that you wrote that I just finished consuming over the last week, came from, and give us some perspective of your career and your past.
So let me try and do it in 45 seconds. Otherwise people will fall asleep. Emigrated to the States in 93, having gone to college in the UK, worked at News International and VNU, big information publishing houses, but was part of a team that took a huge information company public from basically 2 employees to 600. Then went off to run a very, very big unit of Micron, their PC company, and then actually saw a huge problem in the way we were spending money and built an algorithmic tool for planning marketing that basically was used globally by the big tech companies. Built another company, sold another one, and actually the genesis of this book was probably 2013 when we were seeing people talking about social transformation, economic transformation, and business transformation, and I went, isn't this all really the same? It's just part of one collective. And it started a 5-year mission to really understand the DNA of successful digital transformations as they sort of evolved. Because the original research I did probably back in 14, 15 showed that only about 18% were sort of getting it right. And the remaining 80, sort of 90% almost were really miserably failing. So the view was, could you build a book with great case studies, really extraordinary research, and, people like Mark Schwartz and Michael Schrag from MIT that had a fantastic vision about what the world could be like. And that's really what produced the Digital Helix. It came out 2017. I got very lucky. It's a Wall Street Journal, Amazon bestseller. In fact, I think one of the chapters on optimal mindsets had like 100,000 downloads because it acts as a sort of guiding principle for how to get it right. So no matter if you're in a small company of 50, and it's an old business, or you're in a even super fast, high growth unicorn company of 10,000, if you get these 7 components right, you will end up one of those thriving companies, not one of those that are going to be left on the side. And that's me. That's the book.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed the book, and a couple of things that I like about it. You mentioned Mark Schwartz. We had him on the show a couple of weeks ago, and we talked digital transformation. We talked about kind of also having a seat at the table. That was one of his big topics, where technology kind of needs to not just be order takers, but also help drive innovation and move things forward. And comparing, taking his book, or not really comparing, but pairing them together with your book, The Digital Helix, and the way that your book kind of comes at it from a business perspective and gives you all the reasons why, all the pieces that have to come into place. And you talk a lot about getting buy-in from the top down, and not just mandate from the top down, but also like effort put in from the top down. And that's one of the things that I think is really important when it comes to going through a digital transformation process. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of getting the other C-level executives and the other management team on board when you're going through something like this?
Yes, I think there's a classic flaw in IT that is part of the reason why it's so amazing, is that anybody generally in IT, from help desk to application development, absolutely understand where the world is going because it's bits and bytes, it's data, it's frictionless sort of information. The failure often is to comprehend that on the other side of the company or the organization, business leaders live in the now, and they often think about, how do I solve this problem now? How do I get this to be quicker and faster or better? They never think about making it quicker, faster, and better, which is really what digital transformation is about. So I think as IT leaders or managers, we've got to take a seat back, breathe, and say, how do I explain something in a true business sense? And I think that the challenge for most organizations is that every CEO will nod their head. We did some research last year about this in the Global 2000. About 96% said, yeah, we get it, all right? But less than 30% of them are actually doing the right things. I think you've got to help your leader create that vision. You cannot assume that that vision and energy sits there in the same way that it sits inside the brains and hearts of IT professionals. And that bridging process, that educating up, is a really vital part of success. Without it, your great ideas will fall on positive nodding heads, but zero budget.
Do you think some of that, the reason why they know what should be happening, but they're not really doing it, may be fear-based, or what are some of the thoughts that you had?
No, I mean, I used to think it was fear-based, but when we did this research in the Global 2000 last year, as I said, 96% get it. Hey, something's going to happen, but they don't know how to do it. It's sort of like saying to somebody, ride a bike when they're very young. They can't do it unless they're taught how to do it or educated how to go through that process. Mm-hmm. They just don't know how to do it. Imagine a world where you've done an MBA. And I was in a company with Michael Porter, who really basically invented the MBA at Harvard. And Michael used to say, you can either be efficient, or you can be effective, or you can be innovative. Well, no, that's not the case anymore. You can be efficient and effective and innovative using digital technology. So this whole construct is a direct contradiction to the way the vast majority of CEOs and managers at senior level have been trained for the last 30 years with MBA schools. You know, one of the things we found out last year was that over half the CEOs we talked to were more frightened of startups in their segments, and these are really big companies like $50 billion plus, were more frightened of startups than they were of their, historical peers. So the issue is not so much they don't get it, but they don't understand how to articulate it, how to put it into a plan and a process, and where to get going. It's sort of like a sort of cathartic firestorm of choice, and they just don't know where to start.
So would it be better for a company, let's say that has it, but they don't know how to do it, to just try, or should they reach out to get some help, to get some consulting, some counseling, some advice, or what's the best approach?
Well, I think there's two things. Everybody can try and sell consulting, but I don't think it's needed here in some ways. You've got to get everybody pretty well aligned. You can sit in a meeting and somebody says, hey, I want a website that drops all the data through the system into sales, marketing, customer service, legal. All fine to say, but you really have to sit there and say, okay, what's it going to do for us? Why are we doing it? Where's the urgency? Where's the upside? I think the tendency is these huge digital transformation statements end up leading to very disparate projects. I think the solution is you've got to get everybody on the same plate. At the business unit level, at the executive level, and frankly, the IT level, where they all agree. They're actually equal partners at the table, and they all agree on what matters. Because we've seen amazingly good results in isolated areas that can't get migrated. And we've seen okay results in a range of areas that can't get migrated too. Both end up having roughly the same results. But the ones that work are where IT, business unit, and frankly, senior exec are really coordinated. And we talk about 7 components in the book. We won't have time to go through them today. But those 7 components should be the acid test of whether or not you get it right. And it's why we did the book with a front cover you can pull off, because you can then stick the front cover on a cube or an office and say, look, we get these 7 things right, we've got a chance of winning. We don't get these 7 things right, we won't.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And honestly, I was reading through the book and I didn't realize that the cover came off, and I pulled it off and I looked on the inside. I was like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. It's got the 7 components right there on the inside of the cover. And I didn't know that going into it. It was kind of like a welcome surprise.
Good. It's all ribbled and like dimensionalized too, so you can feel it, right?
Yeah, it's nice. One of the other things that I really liked, I thought about with your book, you talked about the companies that are successful when they go through a digital transformation usually have a large number of departments involved. They have almost a whole company involved. Whereas companies that may not be successful have less than 2 or 3 departments involved. Can you explain why that's important or what your research kind of led to find that out?
Yes, math. So when we did the original research in 2013, we said, look, given what you're trying to do here, this is on social. Tell me what sort of results you got, and then you backward look at how they got the right results. And those organizations that had 7 departments involved were like 8 times more successful than departments or activities that only had 2 departments involved. And I've seen the same when you look at more complex digital transformation, even in really big corporations. This is a multiple-leveled, multiple-tentacled, 3-dimensional thing. You can't do this stuff in isolation. If you're in sales, you say, hey, let's get Salesforce and let's try and digitally transform how we sell. Well, it doesn't work if you don't get contracts involved, HR, and marketing, because nothing is isolated in a digital world. So if you're doing an isolated project in a cube or in an office or in a department, no matter how good the intent is, you just don't have a very high chance of success.
Okay, so let me ask you about this, because you also kind of mentioned this in your book, that there are certain cases where it may be beneficial to spin off an isolated group that tries to compete with your existing company. I think you gave Apple and Steve Jobs as kind of one of those examples of how he was able to spin off a group that would try to take his current group out of business.
Yeah, so I'll sort of give you an analogy. Imagine you own the yellow cab company and you're giving capital out to regional companies that want to build their own yellow cab company, and they obviously then lease the cars or sort of effectively mortgage the cars out to drivers. Can you imagine saying to that company, actually, your whole business model is fundamentally wrong. Drivers are going to bring their own cars. Your job is to make sure that they have a mapping system, a payment system, and validation that these drivers are good. It would just completely mind meld you. And the problem, I think, with digital transformation generally is to do it right, to be efficient, to be effective, and be innovative is a fundamental contradiction to the traditional way people are taught how to do it. And so one of the reasons, for example, you're going to see this in the financial services industry pretty soon, you're definitely seeing in healthcare, and I'll give you a good quote on that in a minute, is that it's really difficult to reinvent yourself. It's just impossible. There's a woman we spoke to from a San Diego health organization. It's a really well-known health organization, Sharp Healthcare. And she said, look, every time I think about my customers or consumers, I can't just think about the sort of health organization down the road. I've got to think about the sort of experience they want on Google or Amazon, because that's what they're expecting from healthcare. So it's really, really tough to completely reintegrate new DNA into an old process if that old process isn't prepared to develop and deliver new DNA. And the cab example is a good one, because everything that's good, or questionable at Uber is a direct contradiction to the way we've run the taxi industry for probably 140 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And also, you mentioned Tesla in your book, and I thought a lot about them recently. When it comes to building a car, they didn't just build a car by saying, "Oh, let's enhance the features of a car. Let's just take just the engine out and put an electric engine in." They said, "How can we build a car if we've never built a car before?" And kind of started from that ground up. And there's a lot of things that are in Tesla that are more than just the electric motor. Like the fact that they don't have knobs and buttons, that it's all digital, so they can push updates to it over the air. There's lots of things like that came out of their digital transformation.
So it's interesting. So you could effectively argue that Tesla is actually a battery company or a car company or a platform for experiencing transportation. And I think the fact that they can be all three is dramatic. So we did some work with a big German car company's board about a year ago, and they'd had a major challenge with diesel. And what you realize is that failure made them recognize that they need to be one of those three things too. So, vast array of the IP lawyers are there to look at stuff like engineering pieces and metal. Well, they realize that they're going to have to be a software company, so they're going to have to radically change how they think about lawyers. I think one of the interesting things about all these organizations is if executives spend time looking at what others are doing, it will chastise or motivate them to think and believe differently. And I think if you're in IT and you want to have a big project to start, maybe your biggest secret secret is to have a whole bunch of metaphors or stories that you can talk about. Don't get to discussing the cloud, don't discussing APIs. Use living examples of this stuff, because that's, I think, the best way of bridging the story gap that IT has and, frankly, businesses really need.
So how would someone in IT kind of develop that skill of being a storyteller and not talking about, web services and cloud and, all those things that the CFO doesn't quite understand?
Well, I think you look at their life. It's very interesting. One of the things that we should be aware of is by 2020 or middle of 2020, the largest populace of the workforce on the planet Earth will be millennials. And it's not just those, 30 to 40, all right? But it's actually people, sub-millennial that are going to be 19 to 30. And I think this, you just look at your kids, you just look at young friends, you're going to see really fast how their lives are radically different. How many buy cars? How many cycle to work, have electric bikes, or actually just get a McDonald's burger delivered for $1 because you don't want to go out. I just think you have to look at that generational shift around it. We talk about this in the book, these drivers, and realize it's happening around us. So unless you want to respond to that or stick your head in the ground, I think there's so many living stories now on Forbes or CNN or the BBC. You could easily pick up a story that's relevant in your sector overnight. In fact, let's play around. So give me an industrial sector that you care about.
Let's say TV, media.
All right, so here's 2 or 3 interesting stories of media, right? Cable cutting is a not uncommonly understood term. People don't want to watch on $140 a month. But yeah, we're still spending a lot of money in Hulu, Netflix, and Amazon. And we're still actually watching vastly more TV effectively than we've ever watched before. But we don't watch it on a television, or we don't watch it through a typical contract. It's changing. So imagine if you're in a distribution business or you're in a transportation company. Well, just think about how you need to get product to market differently, in the same way the media marketing industry is doing. I mean, I probably watch 95% of my TV on a laptop, a tablet, and a cell phone. I look at the TV on the wall and go, oh, I wonder why that's there. You just don't want it, right? You just don't use it, right? And at some point, they're like, maybe just put a picture up there. That is millennial norm. And I just think when you look at the TV and marketing media business, even Google is nervous about what could come around them, as is Netflix or Amazon, because it's so easy to create something completely different that can, supersede decades of superiority very fast. I mean, the BBC this week, it's a license-based media company. Everybody gets paid or has to pay as a citizen to use it. They said, we can't give away free licenses to people over the age of 75 anymore, right? Because it's just, we're losing so much money because everybody's doing lots of things in thousands of different places. So I think every industry has these very simple stories. You could just put them on a whiteboard and say, here's a statement, and right, let's work through all the consequences of the statement in our industry. That's a really great workshop. You don't need an expert to do that. That should be done internally.
No, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And when it comes to like TV, I think about it because I have 3 kids and they never watch the television. We still subscribe to cable. I used to work at a cable company for many years, so I'm almost torn to get rid of it. But they never watch TV. They watch YouTube most of the time, or they'll occasionally watch Netflix on their iPads or something. But as far as actually sitting down and watching the big thing on the wall, no, it doesn't happen. Right.
And then you start thinking, wow, there's been an interesting development of these soft screens that you can pull out of tubes. They're starting to play with them in the military. Well, 10 years ago, when they looked at that technology, they said, oh, every house is going to have 5 televisions. Maybe there'll be enough volume for us to put one of these pull-out TVs, sort of soft screen everywhere. Well, the volume of TVs being sold has plummeted because we just don't want to watch a 72-inch screen TV the whole time. We want to watch it in our bedroom or in the train or the car. And I just think there's lots of consequences for this. And I think I take an idea, put it on a whiteboard, and say to people, write around on the right-hand side all the positive things that can happen here. And then on the left side, write all the negative things. You'll find very quickly people's imaginations can go in all the right places super fast.
So let's say you go through this exercise with your management team. You kind of figure out there's a lot changing. We've got to to either move or figure something out. And some of them are afraid to move. They're afraid to take that risk. What are some things that you would say to them about the need for taking risk in a digital age?
There is a quote we use in the book from Mario Andretti that if you're not if you feel in complete control, you're not doing enough. These racing drivers that are on the edge of things, right? Yeah. You got to feel like you're on the edge. You got to get comfortable getting uncomfortable, but you have to intrinsically trust that you can answer one question. And the one question is, what business are we in? There's a piece I wrote on Facebook, about Facebook and Libra, the cryptocurrency this week on Forbes. And it basically says, look, don't think companies like Facebook can't get into cryptocurrency. They've got plenty of cash, they've got lots of backers, and they've got 2.4 billion users. And we've got to realize that businesses are going to be fluid representations of that one question, what business are we in? It's not just going to be we have 6 warehouses in North Carolina and 4 in Dakota, or we've always made cloth this way, or we've always moved products this way. You've got to have that flexibility because the market will destroy you without it. So whereas the traditional Michael Porter barriers of entry, product, price, distribution, all that stuff are still true, they're very easily broken in ways that were never breakable before because of digital technologies enabling that vision to become real.
Yeah, and I'd say even doing what we're doing right now is kind of an example of that because, 10 years ago, if we wanted to get our message out, I had to know somebody that worked at the radio station, or I had to work for a publication where I could write or a TV channel where I can get interviewed. But now I can just go out and buy a microphone, pay for some hosting, and, there you go. There's my media.
Well, no, you're actually a broadcasting channel, all right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we live or die by the conversations we have, by the mechanisms we allow people to listen to and to share with each other. And there's a need to constantly delight every single time. Imagine being able to look at CBS and saying in the 80s, I really don't like your programs on Monday between 6 and 10, Wednesday between 8 in the morning and 10 at night, and Sunday at 5 and 8, and I'm not going to pay to watch them then. Right? Well, that's the model we have now. And I just think that sense of having to constantly delight is the engine that will drive success, not just because you've been there historically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I agree 100%. I think going back to that first question you mentioned that, what is the business we're in? I think a lot of businesses that haven't gone through digital transformation may not know what business they're in. And I always think back to Kodak. That's like my staple example. They thought they were in the film business, but really it should have been where the capturing images video, whether it's digital or film. And by not making that choice fast enough, they kind of, fell apart.
It is an interesting story because I used to work with Carl Guston, who had moved from Apple to there in the early 90s, sort of when Steve had left and they were going through that various range of operational. Mm-hmm. I actually think Kodak got it, but there were 2 problems that really disabled them. And it's a problem that Research in Motion has had, and actually any other giant that's geographically locked. I think if you're locked into a geography, Rochester, Richmond near Toronto with Research in Motion, it's very easy to think the world behaves like you because you just look at this beautiful thing you've created and go, this must be the world. Kodak failed to understand some nuanced shifts in the market that were being talked about 20 years ago, but were not showing a magnitude of shift because they assumed it was all constant. In fact, there's a chart in the book that lets people start to think about trends. How do you see trends as being, early signs or late indicators? And they just missed the late indicators. They could have moved. Polaroid could have done the same. Xerox, frankly, could have done. Because what they were actually about was software. They should have taken their application environment and put it in a bunch of software things, but they couldn't get off the film business because they had enormous liabilities in the silver industry. And, the professional photographic business, which is where they went to at the end, were the last to really adopt digital photography, and they were like the worst place to be. So they sort of made a series of very foolish step function decisions because they didn't recognize the cycle of trends. They just assumed it was all or nothing. And I think that's one of the things we've got to be careful about in this world. It's not all or nothing. We're not all suddenly going to drive electric cars. I mean, there are 1 billion cars on the planet. We will probably on Earth next year sell maybe 180, probably about 1 million cars will be electric next year. That's a pretty small number. Maybe even if it's 10 million, it's still a really small number. So these trends do occur slowly, like, eating 3D printed food or vegans. They're going to be increasingly more predominant, but they're not going to be absolutes instantly. And I think sometimes people expect instant shift, and instant shift doesn't occur.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that's one thing that, cryptocurrency, it's been a while, it's been out for a little bit now, but people still say, oh, no, it's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. But there is that slow shift. And yes, they had the big bust, but now with Facebook coming out, and you talked a little bit about it with Libra. But what do you think their stance and how they're doing that is a little bit different than maybe Bitcoin and Ethereum and some of the other cryptos have done that?
So I think there's three differences. You can read the article on Forbes. You just sort of type in Gale, Facebook.
I'm gonna link that up in the show notes as well.
Yeah, so there are three things to chew over. They have a huge base of trusting customers, devoid of what you do or don't feel about Facebook. People are pretty dedicated. So they have 2.4 billion accounts. And by the way, I say that word accounts because I think there's a bunch of bots in there. It's not just people, but people use it the whole time. And for example, if you want tiny microtransactions, you want to be on a tiny microtransaction platform. That's Facebook. Secondly, there are a lot of people to back this. MasterCard, PayPal, Uber. So what I call unicorn money is in there. And thirdly, they went around and he spent time with the head of the Fed and the head of the Bank of England to get them calm. And fourthly, really, I think we're going through a significant issue of trust in society right now. Do we trust our banks? Do we trust the financial systems? Do we trust our government? So given that they offer 2.4 billion customers, a bunch of money in a bank in Switzerland, a bunch of founders, they are the most well-balanced cryptocurrency that we've seen, which I think reduces potential volatility. Once you see volatility get reduced, then you start seeing transaction flow, trust grows, that takes care of it. And that's been true everything from early currencies in the sort of, post-plague period of the 1400s, all the way through to the development of European currencies, post-gold standard in the 1920s. So it just feels to me they've got the right components together at the right time.
Yeah, I think sometimes coming in a little bit later makes all the difference.
Oh, yeah. First move is a bad place to be. I mean, I'll give an example. I don't know. We're vegan, so we love Beyond Meat because I love meat. I just don't want to kill animals, right? Well, my wife made a great comment. She said, gosh, all those vegan burger companies of 20 years ago must be kicking themselves. Yeah, sometimes you just don't want to be first moving in areas if you don't get it right. Moving at the right time with the right product is magic in a digital environment, because you get rewarded so much quicker than saying, we've been making, soybean burgers for 30 years. They taste awful, all right? So people go, they're terrible. I don't eat them anymore. Somebody turns up with a sort of meat replacement burger that Bill Gates stuffed $100 million into, the level of trust instantly goes up through the ceiling.
Yeah, the Impossible Burger, I haven't tried it yet, but I hear so many things about that all the time.
Like Taco Bell, Wendy's Burger. I mean, I look at McDonald's and go, why haven't you got one? You're crazy.
Yeah.
That would never been a discussion about some chai soy burger 10 years ago. It'd be like, ugh, do we have to have that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And even looking at Apple, a lot of people will say, oh, Apple's so innovative. But a lot of things that they created after someone else did. They weren't the first. Creative
Labs made I've still got it, right? The very first music, MP4 or MP3, right? Terrible thing, impossible to load. In fact, you don't remember this, but Research in Motion on their phones had an ability to put a tiny memory card in. It took like modeling skills to do it. And you could play music on your, BlackBerry Motion device. It took you 20 minutes to get it loaded, and you had to find it in a deep file. But you could do it. Apple made something that was interesting, incredibly easy to do.
No, I think and a lot of people don't even realize that Research in Motion is BlackBerry because it's been such a while since that they were really a relevant phone maker. But I remember on BlackBerry, and you could put an SD card of some sort in there in the back. I think you had to take the battery off to do it, but
I must have damaged the metal things in there with my big clumsy fingers. So I just like the sort of vegan meat business, is going to supersede the traditional soy burger business, just like the iPad has taken over in many ways from a small laptop, or obviously, the Player took over from Creative Labs. And even, here's a paradox. Microsoft had its own player called Zoom.
Oh, I remember Zoom. Yeah, I actually had one.
The history piece of that. But think about this. It was a great idea. You rented your music. Well, 20 years later, Apple's moving to that model. So you could argue Microsoft was really clever. The player was horrendous. The timing was really bad. And the image of a Microsoft device, other than Xbox, was never very good. So it just takes a lot of these things to work. Digital, though, seems to smooth over those really bad things and allows you to bring things together much quicker to happen. Whether or not it's Uber or, I don't know, Uber Eats or any of these other sort of digitalized environments, people generationally are really up for this now. They want to experience things digitally first and physically second.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And there's so many examples we could go on forever. I was wondering if you could just close this out with like one piece of advice for, let's say, a mid-level manager or an IT director or some type of leader that's going through their business is getting ready or is in the midst of some type of digital transformation. What kind of advice would you have for that person to help them be successful while going through this change?
So I'll give you 2 slides, and these are the only 2 slides you need. One slide is blank with a circle in the middle, and you produce a story about your industry. Hey, what's happening in my industry right now? The left-hand part of that slide says what's good about it for us. The right-hand part of the slide says what's bad for us. And the second piece of paper you have is split into 3 columns, or technically 4. What do we stop doing? What do we do differently? What do we start doing for the first time, or what do we continue? That first slide, that strategy slide, the good, the bad, the idea, and that second slide, the sort of stop, start, do different, continue, should be the guiding principle map for how you sell, discuss, and operationalize ideas.
I think that's brilliant. That's one of the things that I try to do with my team on a pretty much a quarterly basis. I go in and I say, okay, what are some things that we're doing correctly that we should continue to do, or that we should improve upon? What are some things that we just need to stop doing? And that's kind of my time management lecture that I go through. Is kind of what can we stop doing? What are we doing that we don't see value in? And then I like the thing about what can we do new that we haven't done before. I think those are 3 great things that we could start doing and to help us move forward as this digital transformation.
Yeah, there's one thing that's stunned us in the research is that organizations that get this right, their executive leaders are investing over 17 and a half hours on average every week on this subject. Doesn't mean they're just reading about it, but they're actually investing in doing it. That's 2.5 days a week, maybe 3, depending if they're playing golf. But 2 days a week, right, where they're really focused. You cannot do this casually. This is a full-bore transition. So one of the things we talked about in the book was you can't put a steam engine into a sail ship and expect the results of a steamship, because that's what very foolish, carrier companies did in the 19th century. You have to rebuild your business as a steamship to carry the steam engine that's digital, because that will get you the change. You can't jerry-rig this. It just won't work.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think when you're talking about that in the book, you mentioned that the hulls weren't strong enough to hold the fuel and hold the engines.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think business is the same way.
Break.
You can't just
work for a little bit. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say you can't just drop technology in there to solve a problem. I think that's a quote you had in your book too, where you talked about digital transformation is as much about human capital and processes as it is technology.
Yeah, we had about 100,000 downloads of one of the chapters on optimal performance, and I think what I've realized when we did it, frankly, was that it was a very clear illustrator that humans matter more in a digital world than ever before.
Mm-hmm. No, I think
is good,
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Got to make sure people give humans the chance to do that. Otherwise, it's a really concerning problem.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I always think about when I think about adding technology to try to solve a problem, if the processes are wrong, you're just going to amplify the problem. You've got to have a clean. You're going to make the inefficient task even more inefficient if you don't make it efficient first.
Oh, totally agree.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Michael. How can people learn more about the things that you're doing in your podcast? We didn't even talk about your podcast. Why don't you give us a little bit about what's going on at your Forbes podcast?
So Forbes only does 2 podcasts, one by Steve Forbes, obviously son of the founder, and me. It's called Futures InFocus, and it really it looks at the world 10 years from now. One of the bizarre facts we found is that only 19% of individuals think about the world 10 years from now, and they think about it once a week. Well, 95% of us are going to be around in 10 years' time. So it's crazy not to think about it more, given what we're going through. So the podcast really interviews, everybody from like 3D food printing experts to the person that cloned Barbara Streisand's dog, all the way through to people that talk about buildings being or sort of organisms that control everything around the individual, and some really cool discussions with technologists. So every week we spend about half an hour, 40 minutes asking people about what the world's going to look like in their area 10 years from now. You can find it on iTunes. It's on Forbes. And we actually even interviewed an NFL head coach last week about the future of human relationships in a data-rich world. So they're intriguing. It's meant for people that want to think about the world 10 years from now. And I think like this, it's designed just to push people's edges a little bit harder.
I think that's awesome. And I love to hear about what's going on in the future. And I think one of my favorite books about that was Kevin Kelly's Inevitable. I thought it had a lot of
great book, wonderful book.
Yeah, a lot of insights on some of the things that are going on or that could be going on in the future. All about technology that exists today. It's just not applied in a certain way. I think it's a great show, great guest, and wonderful aspect. Also, your book, Digital Helix, I'm going to link that up in the show notes as well. It's been very, like I said, I've consumed it pretty heavily over the last couple of weeks, but it's already making an impact with the things that I'm doing at work, going through a digital transformation myself. Well,
look, I hope that the journey and the DNA of the journey you create for sustained change is great, because if you get it right on a consistent basis, it's magic. So it's been a really fun conversation today, and I hope this sparks some of the listeners just to think a little differently about how they handle the future.
Yeah, I hope so too. And like I said, I'll link all this up in the show notes, as well as the website and all the good stuff to your podcast. And hopefully we'll be able to do this again sometime pretty soon.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you ever so much, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Michael Gale. And head on over to geekleader.com. Check out the new design. We redesigned the website, put a page on there called Books, which are books from all the guests that we've had on that wrote their books. And you'll find Michael Gale's book up there as well, the Digital Helix. So check that out. And again, leave us a review. Apple Podcasts would be awesome. Subscribe either in Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your show. We're actually getting a lot of downloads from Overcast, which is an app you can get on your iPhone or iOS device. If you do use Overcast to listen to the show, click the little stars up there. It helps us spread the word of a Geek Leader. All that stuff is awesome and greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Hit me up on Twitter or send me an email or leave me a voicemail at geekleader.com. Thanks so much.